In 1 Kings chapter 4 tonight. If you open your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 4. Okay. Last time we're again just kind of going through the reign of Solomon. Last time in 1 Kings 3, Solomon prayed for wisdom. And, well, the Lord appeared to him and he said, ask me whatever you want me to give you. And Solomon said, well, I don't know how to rule this people. And the Lord said, okay, well, I've given you wisdom. You can now judge and discern what is right and wrong among this great people. And furthermore, even though you didn't ask for things that most kings would ask for, like gold and victory over your enemies and long life, even though you didn't ask for those things, I'm still going to give those things to you as well because of what you chose to ask for in the first place. So that brings us to, of course, Solomon's wisdom is demonstrated in a dispute in the second part of chapter 3 where two women come to him and there's a dead child and a live child, and they, for lack of a better explanation, they can't tell which one is which. And Solomon says, well, we can solve that easily. We'll just take a sword, we'll divide up the living child, give half to each of you. The problem will be solved. And, of course, one of the mothers wants to drop the case at that moment, and the other one wants to continue on that course of rather gruesome action. And from that, Solomon is able to tell which one is the true mother. Because only the true mother of the child would want to avoid seeing her child come to harm, while the false mother would want to see the child die in order to spite the true mother. And so that solution would not have been acceptable to the child's real mother. But everybody was amazed. In verse 28, all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had handed down. They feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. And now we come to chapter 4. It's difficult to kind of get the organization of Solomon's reign down. There's a lot of summary sections where it talks about his economy and his lists of guys, and sometimes it appears, some of the same information appears in Chronicles. It's rearranged. And actually, and this is sometimes less known, there is another version of the book of Kings that's in Greek. It's basically all of the same material, but most of it's been just rearranged and told in a different order. And so you're kind of like, what were they thinking? Why did they arrange it this way? And it's the chicken and egg question. We don't really know which one came first. But nonetheless, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of these chapters now, and I realize that reading lists of names isn't always the most edifying reading in the world, but we're going to read this and we're going to try to see what we can learn from it. In chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. King Solomon was king over all Israel. These were his officials. Azariah, the son of Zadok, was the priest. Elihoreph and Ahijah, the sons of Shisha, were secretaries. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was the recorder. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the army. And Zadok and Abiathar were priests. Azariah, the son of Nathan, was over the deputies. And Zabud, the son of Nathan, a priest, was the king's friend. And Ahishar was over the household, and Adoniram, the son of Abda, was over the men subject to forced labor. Now there's just that's the first list, just the basic officials. Solomon's the king. Azariah is the priest. He's the son of Zadok. We saw him earlier. There's two secretaries. There's the recorder. Some people suggest the state prosecutor. Benaiah is over the army. He claimed that position after he killed Joab. Zadok and Abiathar were priests. Well, now we might have all sorts of alarm bells going off at this point, because if you remember back in chapter 2, Abiathar was dismissed from being a priest. And Solomon was the one that dismissed him. So what's his name doing in this list? Anybody want to venture a guess? I'm sorry? Yeah, it's a historical listing of people that were officials in Solomon's reign. Of course, it's possible that, since they were technically priests at the start of his reign, it would be feasible that their names could appear on a list of people that served during Solomon's reign. So it might just simply be a note of the fact that Zadok and Abiathar were priests at some point in his reign. And there's other suggestions too. Some people simply suggest it's a scribal issue. Some people suggest, there's one suggestion that Solomon actually realized he was wrong to dismiss Abiathar and reinstated him. I think that's going a little too far, but I'll mention it and you can decide what you think of it. And then there's a few other people we don't know about: Azariah, Zabud, Ahishar, Adoniram. Adoniram was also part of David's cabinet as well, although sometimes his name is spelled Adoram, sometimes his name is spelled Adoniram. But he's in charge of forced labor. That may not mean, now this guy may not mean a lot to you, but I guess it's just kind of a point of interest for me because he gets killed later in the book. If you read a little bit further ahead, after Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam becomes king. And Rehoboam, of course, makes all the people really mad at him and they revolt. And so Rehoboam's response is to send them Adoram, who was over the forced labor. And the people stone him to death. So this guy in the list winds up meeting a rather violent end in the story. That's just a note of interest or comment here. And after verses 1 through 6, we have a list of district governors. Solomon had 12 deputies over all Israel who provided for the king and his household. Each man had to provide a month in the year. These are their names. Ben-Hur in the hill country of Ephraim. I guess he had a hit movie named after him, which went on to win 11 Academy Awards. Ben-Decker in Makaz and Sha'albaim and Beth-Shemesh and Elon Beth-Hanan. Ben-Hesed in Aruboth. Soko was his and all the land of Hepher. Ben-Abinadab in the height of Dor. Taphath, the daughter of Solomon, was his wife. Baana, the son of Ahilud, in Ta'anak and Megiddo, and all Beth-Shean, which is beside Zarethan, below Jezreel. From Beth-Shean to Abel-Maholah, as far as the other side of Jokmeam. Ben-Geber in Ramoth-Gilead, the towns of Jair, the sons of Manasseh, which are in Gilead, were the region of Argob, which is in Bashan. 60 great cities with walls and bronze bars were his. Ahinadab, the son of Edo, in Mahanaim. Ahimaaz in Naphtali. He also married Basemath, the daughter of Solomon. Baana, the son of Hushai, in Asher and Baaloth. Jehoshaphat, the son of Peruah, in Issachar. Shimei, the son of Elah, in Benjamin. Geber, the son of Uri, in the land of Gilead, the country of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and of Og, king of Bashan. He was the only deputy who was in the land. Okay. Now, there's a couple of points of interest here. 2 of Solomon's sons-in-law are on this list, in verse 11 and in verse 15. And there's 12 districts. Now you'll note something about these 12 districts. Some of them are named after tribes of Israel, like Ephraim and Naphtali and Asher, Issachar and Benjamin. But some of these districts are not named after tribes of Israel. And frankly, we don't have a clue where some of these places are that are mentioned. We can maybe guess based on process of elimination in regards to what we know of the tribal territories. So I guess, what people have to do is they approach this list and they try to identify the unmentioned tribes. Well, of course, Levi is not going to be a district because he's scattered throughout Israel. Simeon doesn't get to be a district for similar reasons. The Transjordan tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half group of Manasseh, none of them are called by their original names, but they're all called stuff that's beyond the Jordan. Ramoth, Gilead, and so on. West Manasseh seems to be broken into several districts. Dan is unmentioned. Zebulun is unmentioned. And Judah is not mentioned as well. That's where it gets interesting. Because, what's the point of these 12 districts according to verse 7? Why does Solomon divvy up the nation into 12 pieces like this? To provide a month for his household. In other words, this is how we tax you. In a nutshell, the king is taking your stuff and using it for his house. And this, of course, is exactly what Samuel said would happen in 1 Samuel chapter 8. Israel said, "Oh, we want a king, we want a king." And Samuel told them, he said, "If you appoint a king, this is what's going to happen. He's going to take your sons and place them for himself in his chariots. He's going to appoint for himself commanders of thousands and fifties. He's going to appoint people to do his plowing and reaping. He's going to appoint people to make his weapons. He's going to take your daughters for perfumers and cooks and bakers. He's going to take the best of your fields, your vineyards, your olive groves. He's going to take your seed, your vineyard. He's going to take all this stuff from you." You know, this is what big government gets you. It's a lot of taxation. Laugh. And well, what winds up happening? He sets it all up to where all the people, 1/12 of the nation is paying taxes per month. You know, so it's instead of you pay taxes once a year, but everybody pays on a different month, depending on what district you happen to be in. Now, here's the trick, though. These districts aren't divvied up by tribes. So Solomon had to redraw some tribal lines a little bit to get this to work. They had gerrymandering back then, too, didn't they? That's a real thing. Now, there's some ambiguity about this because there are some atlases, if you open them up, will show you Solomon's districts, and they'll note that, oh look, Judah doesn't get a district. And those atlases, and people reading that atlas will then conclude, well, Judah must not have had to pay taxes. How convenient for the tribe that happened to be Solomon's home. That's possible. That actually is possible. One possibility of what's going on here. Now there is a place name in this list called Soko, or Soko, and that is in verse 10. Soko was all his in the land of Heber. The only record elsewhere in the Bible that we have to a place called Soko is always located in Judah, in Joshua 15:35, and 1 Samuel 17:1, and 2 Chronicles 28:18. So there is a possibility that Judah actually did have to pay taxes. But the problem, again, gets more difficult when you start reading textual variants and other things. And like I said, there's another edition of Kings circulating around where the place names are even more confusing because they couldn't, because whoever was writing from Hebrew to Greek didn't know how to properly transliterate the names into ways that we would understand it. And so the bottom line is that we don't really know if Judah paid taxes or not. We do know that the people weren't very happy when Solomon's son became king. Because what happens in 1 Kings chapter 12, Rehoboam gets to the throne, and the first thing the people do in verse 4 is they say, "Your father made our yoke hard, therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you." We want a break, Rehoboam. Your father made it hard for us. We don't want it to be hard. And of course, Rehoboam foolishly replied that, "Oh, my father was easy compared to what I'm going to do to you," which was very foolish of him. So this is the great uncertainty, and I hate to say that I don't know the answer to this, but I really don't know the answer to this. I don't know whether Judah was exempt from taxes or not. I can't find the evidence to decisively say either way, so I'll let you figure the rest out. Okay, I realize this is very dry, and that this passage is probably not read very often in church for a reason, because it's not quite the same level of vibrant edification that you see when you read, say, 2 Samuel 7, where the Lord makes that great promise to David. Let me ask you a question, though. Why is this in the Bible? Why are lists like this important? Anybody know? Oh, anybody got any ideas as to why a list like this would be important? Okay, government cabinet. There's a historical value to it, certainly. We don't know who most of these people are. Most of them are unmentioned anywhere else in the book. There is something to be said, I guess, just about. The overarching theme of Solomon, this part of Solomon's reign, chapters 3 and 4, is he asks the Lord for wisdom. And one of his first tasks, of course, is to organize the kingdom in this way. So this is, you're seeing his wisdom sort of played out. But the result of it is seen in the second part of the chapter in verses 20 through 34. So let's read that now. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. They were eating and drinking and rejoicing. Now, Solomon ruled over all the kingdom from the river to the land of the Philistines to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. That's the result of that list right there. They bring tribute to Solomon. But it's not just the nation of Israel. It's all nations. Keep reading. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed oxen, 100 sheep besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl, for he had dominion over everything west of the river, from Tifsah even to Gaza, over all the kings west of the river. He had peace on all sides around about him. So Judah and Israel lived in safety, every man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Those deputies provided for King Solomon and all who came to King Solomon's table, each in his month. They left nothing lacking. They also brought barley and straw for the horses and swift steeds to the place where it should be, each according to his charge. Now God gave Solomon wisdom and very great discernment and breadth of mind, like the sand that is on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the sons of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. His fame was known in all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon, even to the hyssop that grows on the wall. He spoke also of animals and birds and creeping things and fish. Men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. Okay, now that's a lot of stuff to take in. How are God's promises fulfilled in this chapter? They had peace and prosperity. Okay, what else? There's several promises that are fulfilled in this chapter. Take a good look at it. They were as numerous as the sand that is on the seashore. Anytime you hear that phrase in the Bible, what should you automatically think of? A lot of people, sand on the seashore, right? But what story should you think of when you hear that story? Well, when you hear that statement? Think of Abraham. That's the first time that happened, right? Now, that was the Lord's promise to Abraham. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And Genesis chapter 22 mentions that idea. In Genesis 22 and verse 17. This numerous people, this was the reason Solomon asked God for wisdom, by the way. Remember back in chapter 3 and verses 8 and 9? Solomon said, your servants in the midst of your people, which you've chosen, a great people who are too many to be numbered or counted. So give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil. Okay. And there's another promise that's fulfilled here too, though. Anybody catch it? Okay. I'm sorry? Okay, that actually wasn't what I'm thinking of, but that's true. That is a promise of God that gets fulfilled in this chapter, isn't it? The Lord promised Solomon that he would give him greater wisdom than everybody. And he did. So yeah, I didn't even think of that, but yeah, that's true. That is a fulfillment of God's promise. What else is there? It's a big one. Look at verse 21 and verse 24 in particular. What's going on there? Yeah, they're doing that. What's the big significance of that, though? That's the land that the Lord had promised to them, right? Had Israel ever fully possessed the land that the Lord promised to them before this point? No. That's just it. In Joshua 21, it says that the Lord gave them all the land which He promised. Not one word of the promise to Abraham had failed. But that doesn't mean that Israel acquired the land. And we go on to read, both in Joshua and in Judges, that Israel had failed to drive out the Canaanites, that they had failed to truly take possession of the land. The Lord gave them a free gift, but they did not obtain that free gift. It's kind of a lesson to be learned there implicitly about our salvation even. But here, in Solomon's reign, they have the land. They have the land that the Lord promised to them. That's showing that God is faithful to His promises here. It's a big deal. And they read that in verse 21 and in verse 24, they would have seen that the Lord was fulfilling His promises to Abraham to give them this land. Solomon's borders match the promise descriptions from passages like Genesis 15 or Exodus 23. Okay, and now that they're living in that land, and now that they've got the great population, what would you say their lifestyle is like in this passage, in this text? What is the general tone? What is the feeling of the nation here? Peace, safety, it's plentiful. What about the people? How did they feel about this whole thing? They felt joy. Look at how many times joy is mentioned in this text. In verse 20, Judah and Israel, they were eating, drinking, and rejoicing. Verse 21, Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines, to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Verse 24, he had peace on all sides round about him. Verse 25, they lived in safety, each man under his vine and under his fig tree. Now, this is very prosperous. Solomon, look at Solomon in particular. He has all this, he has a huge provision. His daily provision is 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of meal. Anybody know how much is in a core, by the way? Anybody got like a footnote? 10 bushels? Oh yeah, your Bible's actually giving it a bigger number than mine did. Well, no, I mean I only had 6 and a quarter bushels, which translates to about 58 gallons, depending on whether you're approximately. This is the problem with biblical weights and measures: is sometimes the approximations are going to vary pretty widely. All right, well, your figure is going to be even larger than mine, because at 10 bushels we are looking at 300 bushels of flour and 600 bushels of meal. The way I had it calculated, it came out to 187.5 bushels of flour, 375 bushels of meal, then 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed oxen, 100 sheep, and various other delicacies like deer, gazelle, roebuck, and fat birds. Now, that's per day. Now, did Solomon eat all of this himself in a day? No, nobody eats that much in a day. That's a lot. Well, yeah, the point is he's feeding a lot more people than just himself. This is his daily provision. And the point in verse 27 is it's for all the people who eat at Solomon's table. Anybody who comes and eats at Solomon's table, it's like an all-you-can-eat steak buffet. Nobody's leaving that place hungry. Now, all-you-can-eat steak buffets are wonderful. I'll just say that. Yeah, but that's the kind of thing that happens when you come to Solomon's table. You come to Solomon's table hungry, you will be fed. Kind of foreshadows a greater banquet table that we all hope to sit at one day. Isaiah chapter 25 talks about the Lord of hosts giving a lavish banquet for all the peoples on this mountain. And it was a special banquet that people could come to and eat in. And there's a reason that in the New Testament, Jesus frequently talks about the kingdom in terms of a banquet feast or a wedding feast. Why does he talk about it in those terms so much? Because that was inherently connected with the ideal kingdom in the Jewish mind. When you talk about the kingdom of God, the Jewish people, they thought, oh, it would kind of be like Solomon or David. It'll be like that all over again. Everything will be made out of gold. All the silver will be worthless. We'll be able to eat to the full because the king will be providing so much food for us. It'll be super, super prosperous. I don't think we living in America truly appreciate, what hunger is. Really think about it. We have no clue what hunger is. To the point, you can tell when a nation is well fed when being fat is a symbol of, not being prosperous or being unhealthy. See, in ancient peoples, being fat was always a symbol that you were well off, that you were healthy, that you were well fed. Yeah, in third world countries and India, they always, they look at us bizarrely whenever we talk about how, people talking about how they can lose weight. Why would you want to lose it? So, those kinds of things, though, we just don't understand. We don't really appreciate it. It's like Leviticus chapter 26 talks about this too. This blessing. In Leviticus chapter 26 in verse 10, it says, "You will eat the old supply and clear out the old because of the new." You know you are blessed when you live in a culture where it is commonplace to throw food away to make room for the new food that you made that you had to put in your fridge. Cleaning out your fridge. That's not something that the ancient people would have had a great appreciation for. But they would have probably understood it in the days of Solomon because that was when they had all this food. That's prosperity right there, and it comes from the Lord. Now, prosperity means we should be grateful to the Lord. It also means we should be careful. Don't forget where it comes from. Don't forget to give thanks, and don't say in your prosperity, "My hand, my might, and made this wealth for myself," like in Deuteronomy 8 and verse 19. Otherwise, you forget where your prosperity comes from. You forget, as the Lord says in Hosea 14, "From me comes your fruit." Well, then, you're likely to forget, you're likely to lose that fruit that the Lord provides for you. So Solomon has all this prosperity. He has peace on every side, a fulfillment of the promise to David. And in verse 25, there's an expression that's used. Every man lived in safety under his vine and his fig tree. Does anybody know what that means? Everybody lived under his vine and his fig tree. No. There's kind of that expression appears quite a few times in the Old Testament. And it's usually a reference to kind of a holistic peace and prosperity of a society. The vine and the fig tree are paired together like that. In Micah chapter 4, for instance, in verse 4, Micah describes a time. Micah has a version of Isaiah's oracle where, the mountain of the Lord of hosts will be established as the chief of the mountains. All nations will flow into it. In Micah chapter 4, it says they will hammer their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation. Never again will they learn war. Verse 4 goes on, adds this piece of information. Each of them will sit under his vine and under his fig tree with no one to make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. You have peace. You don't have to live inside your walled city. You can sit outside in your field. Sit under your tree. Enjoy the shade. Just simply enjoy yourself. It's rest in the true definition of the word. It's almost like the Garden of Eden has been restored, hasn't it? Almost. And so the reverse of that is true too. If you lose your vine and your fig tree, it's considered judgment from the Lord. Whenever Sennacherib comes to invade Jerusalem in 2 Kings 18, one of the offers he makes them, come out of the city and surrender, and you all can sit under your vine and your fig tree until we take you away to a land just like yours. Sennacherib's trying to bribe them into giving up the city without a fight, avoiding a long siege. But it's a false promise of sitting under your vine and your fig tree because it's really not safety. The Assyrians will take them captive and lock them away, scatter them among the nations, enslave them. So Sennacherib offers a false return to the Solomonic prosperity. But here, of course, we see that true prosperity realized in Solomon's day. And one other thing to note, just in passing, Solomon has a lot of horses. What do we all think of that? That's a lot of horses. Now, there's again a variant. In the account in Chronicles only has 1,400 horse stalls, whereas here it's 40,000 horse stalls. And this gets into the issue again of big numbers in Hebrew and how they're translated. Now, what do we think of the fact that he had so many horses? Being prepared for war, because that's what the horse was. It was a war animal, right? Was Solomon supposed to have this many horses? This will be discussed a little more when we get to chapter 10, but anybody remember if the law said anything about this? The law said something about this, or I wouldn't bring it up. Did anybody remember what the law said about this? Deuteronomy chapter 17 talks about what kings are supposed to do. Can I get a volunteer to read verses 14 through 16? Yeah, it's Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 16. Anyone? What did the law say about doing this? Don't do it. Multiplying horses is a no-no. Also, in the next verse, it tells them not to multiply wives, which we're going to see Solomon did that too. The text is kind of holding back, kind of telling the story with a wink. Essentially, it's, because Solomon's reign has a lot of good going on, there's a couple ominous ringtones in the background, and they start to become more emphatic as we get into the story, especially in chapters 9, 10, and 11. But right now the text is mostly upbeat, and we're getting into Solomon's temple. Let's talk about his wisdom. We talked about his wealth. Let's talk about his wisdom. Wisdom is really the key word in verses 29 through 34 of chapter 4. God gave Solomon wisdom and great discernment and great breadth of mind. And how much wisdom did Solomon have? What? Like the sand that is on the seashore. Where did we see that expression before? Yeah, we just saw that, didn't we? We have people like the sand on the seashore, and we have wisdom like the sand on the seashore. So it's pretty abundant. And he's wiser than all men. And the author wants to kind of drive this home. So he starts comparing it to everybody, basically. He compares it to the great centers of wisdom. The sons of the east, the place where the Magi who saw Jesus came from, and the wisdom of Egypt, the place where Moses was brought up, and the wisdom and learning of the Egyptians. Solomon's wiser than that. And what about the big shot wise men of the day? Now, admittedly, how many of you know who Ethan the Ezrahite or Heman, Calcul, and Darda are? Anybody know who those people are at all? There's one name in there that we would recognize if we read the Psalms a little more in depth. And Ethan the Ezrahite was the guy that wrote Psalm 89, actually, if you go and look at the heading there. But, we don't know who most of these guys are outside of this text. It was just supposed to be, these are the big shot wise men of the day. But Solomon's wiser than them. So much to the point now, you don't even know who these other guys are. So Solomon's wisdom, it's superior to all other centers of wisdom. It's superior to all other wise men. Verse 32, it's superior in quantity. He speaks 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. Now, do we have all of those wonderful proverbs and songs that Solomon spoke and wrote and sang? No, we don't have all of those. The vast majority of that information has not been preserved. The book of Proverbs that we attribute to Solomon, there's only 915 verses in the whole book. And most of them, there's some Proverbs that cover several verses, and there's quite a few Proverbs that aren't even written by Solomon, actually. Go read chapters 30 and 31, for instance. So, not everything's attributed to Solomon. We only have maybe not even a third of what he said on record. We have a couple of his songs. Psalm 72 was written by Solomon. Psalm 127 was written by Solomon. He contributed to the Songs of Ascents. And, of course, the Song of Songs is frequently associated with Solomon as well. That's... although some people think that's several different songs. And it's a bit different from any other book of the Bible at all, for that matter. Solomon's wisdom was not only superior in quantity, it was superior in scope. He talks about trees, he talks about cedar and hyssop and animals and birds and creeping things and fish. And we may kind of go, well, so he knew a lot about flora and fauna, so what? It was a bigger deal back then, of course. Solomon has great deal of knowledge of flora and fauna. You have to know these things when you're a king. The observation of the natural world was frequently a basis for wisdom. And you see in Proverbs 30 or Job 38 through 41, or even in Matthew, when Jesus is giving the Sermon on the Mount, he points to the flowers, he points to the birds and says, look at them. That's how you can find what wisdom is. Look at the lilies of the field. They're better dressed than Solomon was, and they don't do anything. Look at the birds of the air. They don't really do anything either, and God feeds them. So wisdom is frequently based on looking at the natural world and drawing a conclusion based on that. You see what God has made, you learn a lesson from it. Now, of course, the Scriptures are filled with examples of that kind of thing. The book of Proverbs itself is kind of an interesting read. Now, not everything in the book of Proverbs... And when people read Proverbs, sometimes they read them the wrong way. They read them as if they were these universal truths without any exception whatsoever. Like, train up your child in the way he should go. When he's older, he will not depart from it. Is that true? Yeah. Is that without exception? Well, yeah. Otherwise, you would think that the Lord, who would be the greatest parent of all, wouldn't have had his children go astray if it were universally true. It's kind of like, the good advice section. It's like me telling you, if you change the oil in your car will run. Well, yeah, you're supposed to do that. But something else could go wrong. There could be some extenuating circumstance. And so it's kind of important to realize, that that's the way wisdom works. Is sometimes, it gives general principles which are usually true. Think about. That was a tangent. And finally, verse 34, not only superior in quantity and scope, but superior in renown as well. Men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of the earth who heard his wisdom. Men came from everywhere. We're going to get a specific example later in chapter 10 of the Queen of Sheba coming to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And when she gets there, she says, well, I didn't even hear the half of it. What she sees and what she hears winds up surpassing what the rumors were saying. So that's the incredible wisdom of Solomon. Okay. That's chapter 4. Any comments or questions? We have a little time left. All right. Chapters 5 through 9 are about the temple. And really kind of the centerpiece of Solomon's reign. And it's kind of difficult to work all this out because the account of the temple's construction is not all-inclusive. We're not told everything about how to do this. And if you sat down with the Bible in one hand and your architectural tools in the other, and you set out to build the temple based only on the instructions that you get in the Bible, you're not going to be able to reproduce what they had back then. You don't have all, because the Bible doesn't tell you everything. It doesn't tell you how thick the walls were. It doesn't tell you what the roofing was like. And there's a lot of difficulties. It doesn't tell you the exact, precise arrangement. And the point of this narrative is not, here's how to build your own temple. If you walk away from it thinking that, you've kind of missed it. The point of this narrative is to talk about the temple and what it was for. What was the temple for? Worship. Okay, good. What else? Sacrifice. Yeah, it was a part of worship. Yeah. What was a temple at its heart and soul? What is it supposed to be? Yeah, it was supposed to be where God lived. Now, I understand God is omnipresent. He's everywhere, technically. But the temple was supposed to be a special dwelling place of God. No, the Garden of Eden was supposed to be a place where God could dwell with man, but man messed that one up. And mankind has built a lot of pagan temples, places where he can commune with his God, because he realizes there's something missing in his life. He wants to get back to God. So he constructs a temple for himself, and he kind of goes there to worship. Now, technically, there was already a place to worship the Lord and for the Lord to dwell in. And what was that called? It was the tabernacle, right? And we've kind of been over some of this before. I want to get a better marker than that. All right, the tabernacle had this layout to it. You have an outer court, you have the holy place, and you have the most holy place. And we've talked about this threefold structure before. Any of the Jews could come in the outer court to worship. They could sacrifice stuff on the altar. Only the priests could go in the holy place. Only the high priest could go in the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant was located. He could only do that once a year on the Day of Atonement. One day of the year on the Day of Atonement. He would actually go in several times during that day, technically. All right, well, when they built the temple has a most holy place, and it has a holy place. But is that all there is to it? No, there's some extra stuff too. It has a porch, for instance. Tabernacle didn't have a porch. It has these side rooms as well, which we're going to talk about. And it has some other stuff in the courtyard that wasn't in the other one. It has it has the altar, of course, and the very large sea, basically a giant bowl that sat on top of these bronze bowls. The temple was a little more elaborate, and it had actually several layers of courts, which aren't really discussed in Kings per se. Kings doesn't really talk about the inner court or the outer court or any of that construction type stuff. We know about that because of other passages in Scripture. But you'll notice it follows the same basic structure and the same rules for those two chambers, the holy place and the most holy place. They put the Ark of the Covenant in the most holy place, and then, very similar to what happened in Exodus 40, the cloud of God's presence comes into the temple and fills it, and He dwells among His people in a much fuller sense. Now, there's a lot of discussion about why they needed to build the temple. Wasn't the tabernacle good enough? And really what this is kind of God coming to a resting place. It's more grand, it's larger in dimension, it has all sorts of extra features to it. And a lot of the things that the Levites were doing before, they're not going to do anymore. If you remember in Numbers chapter, in the book of Numbers, there were these rules about who had to carry what stuff when they moved the tabernacle, right? The Kohathites carry this, you carry the furniture, and you guys carry the curtains, and you guys carry the other pieces. Well, they're not going to be doing that anymore because you're not going to be moving this. It's a permanent structure. But the Levites did get other duties that came with this temple as well. They would become singers and players of instruments and things like that. So that was part of the temple. That's part of what the shift to the temple means as well. Well, we're out of time. There's more stuff we could say, but we'll get into chapter 5 next time and hopefully deal with some of those things. So, any comments or questions before we close? All right, well, enjoyed your attention, and I hope that this was productive and thought-provoking, and we'll look next time at 1 Kings chapter 5.